Chapter 53, Community Ecology, Part 1 of 2. So today we're going to look at how communities interact. Right? So a community is just lots of different species living in the same place at the same time. So you can see from the graphic, I just pulled this off of Google, we've got a bunch of different species. We've got pollinators and predators and parasites. We've got competitors. There's plants, there's animals, there's bacteria. There's even viruses represented here. So when you think about a community, sure, it's lots of different species all living next to each other, but they're not all doing their own thing. They're not socially distancing from each other. They're interacting. So some of them they're eating other species. Some of them are being eaten by other species. Some of them are parasitizing other species. Some of them are helping other species. There's lots of ways that they can interact. And so this chapter is going to focus on all the interactions that members of a community can have. All right, and one result that can happen from two species interacting is coevolution. So coevolution is the evolution of genetically based reciprocal adaptations in two or more interacting species. Okay, so in other words, species are going to be evolving and speciating, and the mechanisms of evolution that we talked about for a long time are going to create species that are good at surviving and reproducing. But sometimes natural selection is going to drive the evolution of two species at the same time. So as an example, let's talk about this guy. This dude's an ant, and this is the leaf of an acacia plant. And this is an example of coevolution because the ants and the acacia plant have both evolved together. And so what's happened is the acacia plant has some needs. So it can get sunlight and it can get carbon dioxide and water. It does its plant thing, but it lives in the tropical rainforest where there's lots of herbivores around. So there's grasshoppers and caterpillars and deer and whatever. All these different herbivores can take snacks, can take bites out of their leaves and stems. So they need a personal defense force. They need someone to protect them from the herbivores. Meanwhile, the ants have needs. The ants need food and water and place to live. And so in this, for this example, they have co-evolved in a way that's mutualistic. In other words, they both benefit each other. The acacia provides little homes for the ants to live in, so check off habitat for the ants. And inside these little homes, the ants get food and water. So basically the homes, and oftentimes it's at the base of, or the inside of their thorns of the acacia tree, they're plumbed with xylem and phloem that basically deliver sugar water and regular water into the base of these thorns, and the ants can lap it up. So the ants get food, shelter, and water. Pretty cool. And meanwhile, the plant gets a colony of ants living inside of it, which is cool because the ants are carnivores. So anytime a caterpillar or grasshopper or whatever lands on the plant, then the ants run out and eat it or bite it and sting it. Or if a deer starts browsing on the leaves, the ants maybe jump on its nose and start biting and stinging it. So the ant gets a place to live and food and water, and the plant gets a personal defense force. There are other examples of coevolution as well. So a classic textbook example, which your textbook uses, is cheetahs and antelopes. So they've co-evolved together, not in a mutualistic way where they're both benefiting, but natural selection is shaping them directionally in a similar way. So as antelopes get faster, they're going to be able to outrun more cheetahs. And as the antelopes get faster, the cheetahs need to get faster. So the cheetahs eventually evolve to become faster, and then they catch more antelopes. And then the antelopes, the fastest ones, survive the cheetahs and are able to reproduce and have kids. So the next generation is faster, which means the next generation of cheetahs is faster, and so on and so forth. So eventually you get really fast antelopes and really fast cheetahs. So that's an example of coevolution. So these are just two examples of the ways that species interact and how evolution shapes them. All animals also have to get food. All right, so they can get that in, oh, I skipped a slide. So they can get food in two different ways. They can be predators, so animals can eat other animals. And this comes with some pros and cons, talk about in a second. And herbivores eat plants. All right, so what are the benefits of both? Well, if you're a predator, the pro is when you eat another animal, it's really digestible. You're eating something that's made out of the same types of muscle and bone as you are, and so you're getting a healthy meal. The bad news is you got to go catch your prey. So you got to figure out how you're going to catch prey and hunt it, or you're going to run after it, or you're going to ambush it, whatever. Herbivores, their advantage is there's plants everywhere. Like there's plants everywhere. The plants don't move. The plants don't run. They don't hide. So there's not really a problem in finding food usually. The problem is the food stinks. So the food is just not super healthy and it's really difficult to digest. And then you also have the problem of getting eaten by predators. Okay, so how do predators and herbivores interact? And what are some of the other interactions that animals can have? So look at the table. So look at predation. In predation, predators benefit from eating other animals, but their prey does not benefit. They get killed or injured. Herbivores benefit because they're eating plants, but the plants that they're eating get injured or killed. These are both negative interaction, positive for one, negative for the other. Parasitism. Parasites get nutrients and energy, but the host that they're parasiting is killed or injured. So it's a negative interaction. So predation, herbivory, and parasitism are all similar interactions because one player benefits and one player is harmed. Competition is when two individuals of the same species or two different species are competing for the same resources. So competition is an interaction where both players have a negative impact. In other words, if a squirrel and a blue jay are both competing for acorns, every time an acorn is eaten by a blue jay, then a squirrel is going to lose out because that's one less acorn for it, and so on and so forth. So competition, and we'll talk more about this later, but competition is bad for everybody. In commensalism, one population or species benefits and the other one, they don't care. They might not even know. Raccoons and humans. So raccoons benefit from humans because they can raid the trash and eat trash. That's cool. Good for the raccoon. How are we harmed? Well, not really. We might have to clean up our trash now and then, but trash is trash. That means we don't want it. So a raccoon snacking on a banana peel or whatever the heck they eat doesn't really harm us. In mutualism, both populations benefit. So that would be the acacia and the ant example I just talked about. They both benefit from their interactions. So interactions vary. These are some of the main categories. We'll talk about all of them in more detail. Animals also have to have adaptations for feeding. So in other words, they need to figure out how they're going to get food and get food in an effective manner. So if you're a cheetah, you need to run fast, but you need to also have sharp teeth to stab and tear and bring down your prey. If you're a poisonous snake, you got to have a way to sense your prey and strike it and inject venom into it. So if you're a cow, then you have to have a specialized digestive system for breaking down the cellulose in grass, and you have to have the right type of teeth in order to grind the grass up. So we see that all animals have adaptations for feeding, and we can put these into two categories: specialists and generalists. So specialists feed on one or just a few types of food. So I just went blank. What does the book say? The book says that a apple snail consumes, oh no, just kidding. The book says that the Everglades kite, which is a bird, consumes just one prey species, the apple snail. Cool. Let's go back to something that we're more familiar with. Squirrels, my favorite. So squirrels are specialists. They eat acorns. That's about it. They might eat some other nuts like walnuts or whatever, but they have a very limited type of food that they can consume. Generalists are the opposite. Generalists can eat several different types of food. So a black bear is an example of a generalist. So a black bear might bring down prey, or it might eat grubs, or it might eat berries or catch fish, or it might raid your bird feeder or whatever. So it's more of a generalist. What are the pros and cons? Well, if you're a specialist, you're really good at getting that type of prey. And a squirrel is awesome at finding and eating acorns. But the problem with being a specialist is you're only depending on one type of food. So if all the oak trees die, there's no more acorns, the squirrels are in trouble. They can't easily switch to something else. Generalists aren't going to be quite as good at catching their prey. So a black bear isn't going to be awesome at catching, live game, like baby deer or whatever. It's going to be okay at it. So generalists are just going to have to deal with being okay at getting all the types of food that they eat. But if there are no deer available, then maybe they can eat more berries. So generalists are a little bit more flexible, but they're not as efficient. So this leads to optimal foraging theory. Optimal foraging theory is just a theory that predicts that an animal's diet is a compromise between the costs and benefits associated with different types of food. In other words, every animal is going to eat the types of food that are best for them, that give them the highest profit. So look at this graphic that I pulled off Google. So this is a shore crab, and it eats these mussels. So it's got to use its claws to open up the mussel and eat the good stuff inside. The mussels come in different sizes. So the small ones are 1 centimeter long, and the big ones are maybe 3.5 centimeters. Well, what size mussel does the crab prefer to eat? So you might think, well, if it eats the big ones, it's getting more meat per mussel, so maybe it eats big ones. Or if it eats the small ones, it can eat a lot more really quickly. And the answer is, based on the data, that they prefer medium-sized mussels. So the bigger the mussel, then the more time it takes the crab and the more energy they have to put into opening the shell. And the smaller the mussel, then the less energy they get out of eating each one. So it turns out that the mussels that are the highest profitability are the medium-sized ones. They're big enough that they can get a good number of calories, but they're not so big that they're difficult to open. And we see that that's true when we measure what size mussels the crabs prefer to eat. It turns out that most of their diet consists of the medium-sized mussels. So crabs, these shore crabs, are maximizing the amount of profitability from their diet. And this is true for all animals. So to use another example, maybe a cheetah eats antelopes. Well, if it catches an adult antelope, that's a bigger meal, but it's going to have to work a lot harder to get an adult antelope. So what about a baby antelope? They're easier to catch, so maybe they don't have as much meat, but maybe it's more profitable for them to go after the young ones. So the point is, optimal foraging theory says that every animal maximizes the profitability of the food that it's choosing to eat. All right, herbivores don't like getting eaten. It's not good to get caught by a cheetah and eaten while you're partially alive, for example. So they have defenses against predation. So let's just run through a list. So first there's cryptic coloration. This is fancy talk for camouflage. So cryptic coloration means you blend in with your surroundings. Maybe you look like a leaf, or maybe you're a caterpillar and you look like bird poop, or whatever. So in these cases, you're trying not to get eaten by blending in with your environment. If the predator can't find you or doesn't see you or can't detect you, or they think you're poop, then they're not going to mess with you. So that's an easy thing to do. You don't have to change your behavior. You just change your morphology. Or maybe instead of hiding, you want to fight. So startle defenses and weapons are more in the fight category. So a startle defense is when a predator interacts with you, you might try to scare it. So maybe you hiss or you yell, you make a sudden movement or a sudden sound, maybe you flash some bright colors, or if you're a moth, maybe you have eye spots on your wings and you show these spots and it looks to the predator like you have big eyes and it freaks it out and it flies off. Another option is to have weapons. So maybe you can sting, or you can bite, or you've got a shell, or you've got a bunch of nasty tasting chemicals you can secrete, or if you're a skunk, you can spray nasty smelling chemicals. So those are all different types of weapons that allow you to fight back against a predator. Some herbivores, some prey, I should say, will display aposematic coloration. So we see that here with this guy. So this frog is bright green. So he looks like he's camouflaged, but really he kind of sticks out. So if you were walking along the forest floor, you would see this guy. And some of them are orange or blue or more of a regular green color. And so they stick out. And so they go ahead and stick out because they're playing this dare game. They're saying, hey, I have aposematic coloration, so I stick out against the background. You can see me easily. I dare you to eat me. And the reason they're daring the predator eat them is because animals that have aposematic coloration usually have venoms or poisons. Basically, if they get eaten, that are going to make the predator really sick. Mimicry is when one species evolves an appearance resembling another species. There's two categories of mimicry. There's Batesian and Mullerian. In Batesian mimicry, a harmless species, or a species that can be eaten, resembles a harmful or a poisonous one. So in this example, we've got two species of caterpillars. This is the flannel moth, and this is the Cinereus mourner, cool name. And this one's poisonous. So it also has aposematic coloration. It's bright orange. It's like, go ahead, eat me, fools. And then this caterpillar, completely different species, it's also orange. And so it's benefiting from this guy. This guy goes ahead and spends the energy making poisons, so he's unpalatable, can't be eaten. And this one doesn't make the poisons, and instead it bluffs. It paints itself bright orange, and it says, hey, I'm poisonous, don't eat me. And it's relying on the predators knowing that this orange caterpillar is unedible, and so therefore maybe the predators are unwilling to take a chance eating this guy because it might be poisonous. In Mullerian mimicry, you get two or more unpalatable species that share a similar appearance. So this reinforces in the predators that particular shape or color pattern is bad. And the book uses these butterflies, but it's not a great example. I wish I had shown you a picture of a bumblebee and a wasp. So bumblebees are yellow and black, and then if you see a yellow jacket, it's also yellow and black. So that's an example of Mullerian mimicry. The honeybee and the wasp both can sting you. So if you see something yellow and black flying around you, you're going to avoid it because maybe you've been stung by a bumblebee before. So predators have to figure out ways to overcome these herbivorous defenses. So here's an example of that. This is a beetle that when threatened, it raises its abdomen up in the air and it can squirt out nasty chemicals. And this is a grasshopper mouse that eats these guys. I don't know why it's called a grasshopper mouse. It should be called the beetle mouse, but whatever. And so it eats these by it grabs it and it shoves its abdomen in the dirt. So when it sprays the chemicals in the dirt, and then it starts eating the beetle, starting with the other end with its head. So predators have to overcome these defenses. All right, competition. So populations of different species often use the same resources, and the resources are limited. There's only so much food to go around. So they have to compete for these resources. So this competition comes in a couple different categories. The first two are interspecific and intraspecific competition. In interspecific competition, you have two different species competing over a limited resource. So here we've got a leopard and a lion, and they're mad at each other, and maybe they're just off camera, there's a dead wildebeest or something. So there's one wildebeest to get eaten, and the leopard and the lion compete for it. So this is interspecific. Interspecific competition is bad because they're going to fight each other maybe, they're going to risk getting injured, and then one of them's going to win and one of them's going to lose. So interspecific competition is a pressure on species, and it helps shape their evolution. Intraspecific competition is competition between two members of the same species. So here we've got two bighorn sheep that are about to bonk heads. Members of the same species fighting with each other. What resource are they fighting for? Well, in this case, they're fighting for females. Intraspecific competition is also bad in the sense that it reduces the size and population growth rate of the competitors. So because they're fighting, one of these guys is going to win and the other one's going to lose. The winner gets to mate, the loser doesn't get to. So that reduces population growth or population diversity. Which one is going to be harder on a species, interspecific or intraspecific? The answer is intraspecific. So competing with your own species is harder than, or puts more pressure on you, than competing with a member of another species. So let's go back to squirrels. This is probably driving you crazy. I talk about squirrels all the time. But squirrels competing with other squirrels is more of a pressure than a squirrel competing with a blue jay. And that's because squirrels are going to compete for all the exact same things. They're going to be around at the same time. They're going to be eating the same foods. They're going to be looking for the same habitat. Blue jays are going to eat the same foods, but they're not going to nest in the same places. The blue jays can move in and out of the ecosystem, so the competition pressure isn't as great. There's also two categories of competition called interference and exploitative competition. So interference competition is when individuals of one species harm another species directly. So this could be a lion chasing off a leopard from a kill, or it could be a plant that's releasing poisons and preventing another plant from growing nearby. In the example I use here, here's interference competition. These two caterpillars are trying to eat the same leaf, and so they're kind of competing over this limited food resource. In exploitative competition, they're not necessarily competing directly. Instead, they're using the same resource. So in exploitative competition, a lion eats an antelope, and that means there's one less antelope for the leopard to eat. So just two different ways that competition can kind of take shape. This leads to the competitive exclusion principle. So this is based on a famous experiment using two types of paramecium. So what they did was they gave plenty of food, put plenty of food in a vial, and then added this guy, Paramecium caudatum. And its population grew exponentially, and then it kind of flattened out over time. So it was able to eat this food, and its population grew, and everybody's happy. Then they did the same thing with another species, Paramecium aurelia. They put it in a vial with plenty of food, population grew, and then it leveled out. Okay, but in those first two examples, there was no competition. Or there wasn't interspecific competition, I should say. What happens when these two species have to compete with each other? So here they put food in a vial and they add both species. And initially everything's fine. Their populations grow. But over time, the caudatum population declines. And the aurelia population kind of flattens out. So of these two species, which one is the better competitor? The answer is aurelia. So aurelia is able to outcompete the caudatum. All right, so the competitive exclusion principle says populations of two or more species cannot coexist forever, assuming that they're relying on the same resources. All right, so in other words, these two species can't live side by side because one of them, in this case aurelia, is a better competitor. So when two species are going, when two species are competing for the exact same resource, if one of them has a slight advantage, then it's going to outcompete the other species and can even cause it to go extinct. So how do species respond? Well, let's look at some ways. So to do that, let's talk about niches. So every species has an ecological niche. The ecological niche is just the resource use of a particular species, all right? And the niche can be divided into two subcategories, the fundamental niche and the realized niche. The fundamental niche is the range of resources that a species can use. The realized niche is the range of resources that a species actually uses. So as an example, let's look at two species of barnacles. All right, so what we find is that this species of barnacle lives in the upper part of the rock that gets exposed by the low tide, and this species of barnacle tends to live underwater. If you remove these underwater guys, then these guys, the above water ones, can expand down into the underwater habitat. But if you remove these guys, then these guys won't necessarily expand into the above water habitat. Okay, so what's the fundamental niche of the above water guy? Well, the fundamental niche is everything above water and down below. What's the fundamental niche of this guy? Well, this guy, his fundamental niche, where it can live is where it is living, right? Where it is living in competition. So this means that this one, it has a large fundamental niche. It can live above water and below water, but its realized niche, where it actually lives when it's competing with another species, is just above the low tide mark. All right, to look at it again, here's the fundamental niche of species number one. So this is the place, this is soil moisture, so it's actually changing examples. But a plant can live in this range of soil moisture, in this range of temperature. When you look at where it actually lives, it tends to live over here on the right side. So the realized niche is always smaller than the fundamental niche. Meanwhile, species 2, its fundamental niche, it can live in this region, right? But it actually lives here, right? So if you remove this species, then we would expect this one to expand its realized niche and take over some of this territory. But when the two species are competing with each other, this one is a better competitor, so its realized niche includes this range of temperature and soil moisture, and this species kind of gets pushed out, so it lives over here. And so they don't overlap because they're trying not to compete with each other. Another way that species try not to compete with each other is through resource partitioning. So this is the use of different resources or the use of resources in different ways by species living in the same place. Let's look at two examples. Here we've got different warblers. This species lives high on the tree and eats resources from up here. This one lives in the middle and eats resources from here. This one lives on the bottom and eats resources from here. So each of them has specialized on the food that's found on a different part of the tree. And why would they do that? That's to reduce competition. So in an effort to reduce competition, they kind of divvy up the resources that are available, and each of them specializes in a different type of resource so that they don't have to compete. With these plants, it's something similar. So this plant has shallow roots, this one has medium roots, and this one has long roots. So this one's getting water from close to the surface, this one's getting water from medium depths, and this one's getting water from the deepest depths. So why do they do that? This means they can live side by side and they're not all competing for the same limited resource, in this case, water and nutrients in the soil. All right, this means that over time, as the animals specialize in different types of food and undergo resource partitioning, we're going to see character displacement. Character displacement is simply when sympatric populations living in the same place, are morphologically different and use different resources. So let's return to Darwin's finches on the Galapagos. So when this species, Fortis, lives by itself, this is a nice bell-shaped curve of its bill depth. So it averages around 10 millimeters. This guy, Fulginosa, when it lives by itself, here's its bill depth. But when they live together, they partition resources. This one eats smaller seeds, this one eats larger seeds. And what happens is, in the sympatric population, this one has smaller beaks and this one has larger beaks compared to the populations living by themselves. So this is an example of character displacement. The beaks got smaller or larger, and that's because they were undergoing resource partitioning and are eating different sized seeds, and they're trying to reduce competition. This one says, I'll eat the small ones. This one says, hey, that's cool, I'll eat the big ones. So sometimes interactions aren't just eating and getting eaten, but they take on there's other types of relationships. So symbiosis is a close ecological interaction. And that interaction is not always good. In other words, symbiosis would include commensalism, it would include mutualism, and parasitism. We'll talk about each in turn. In commensalism, one species benefits and the other experiences neither benefit nor harm. This is going back to the raccoon example I used earlier. Maybe a better example is here. This is a cattle egret, a type of bird, and this is an American buffalo. So this one benefits from this relationship because he, as a bird, or she, eats the insects that are attracted to the buffalo, so it gets a meal. Um, Actually, it eats the insects that when the buffalo is grazing, it stirs up insects in the field and the bird swoops down and eats them. So, what benefit does the buffalo get? Well, nothing. But it doesn't care. It's not harmed, nor is it hurt by the presence of the bird. In mutualism, both species benefit. So, here, I'll just go to this. So, in mutualism, both species benefit. So, let's look at some examples. Mutualism, one example is ants and the acacia trees that they live on that I talked about earlier. So here's the ants, here's the thorns that the acacia tree grows. So they both benefit. The ants get a meal and a place to live. The plants get a defense squad to protect them from herbivores. This is an eel. So it will open up its mouth and allow these little fish, what are they called? Blue streak cleaner wrasses. No, not wrasses. So they swim into the eel's mouth and they eat parasites that are inside the eel's mouth. So this is mutualism. The eel benefits because it gets a dental teeth cleaning, and the blue streaks benefit because they get a free meal. I could go on and on talking about all sorts of different examples, but that's probably good. I love Cheetos. Have you ever tried Flaming Hot Cheetos? They are delicious. It's mutualistic. I get to eat some delicious hot Cheetos, and the Cheetos company gets profit because I buy the Cheetos. Whatever. All right, other interactions include parasitism. So a parasite is basically an interaction where one organism benefits and another organism is harmed. Typically, the parasite gets food and resources and a place to live, and the host loses nutrients, loses blood, whatever. So a good example is a flea. A flea is a parasite. The flea drinks the blood of the dog. It's able to use the nutrients in the blood to lay eggs and to live. And so the flea benefits, but the host, in this case the dog, is harmed. Parasites come in two categories: endoparasites and ectoparasites. Endoparasites live inside of their host, so think of like a worm living inside of an animal. It's an endoparasite. Ectoparasites live on the outside, so a tick or a flea are examples of ectoparasites. There's pros and cons to both. If you're an endoparasite, once you get inside your host, that's awesome, as long as you can fight off its immune system, but it can be hard to get inside of a host. Ectoparasites, you just latch onto the outside and maybe drink blood like a tick. That's cool. You don't have to fight off an immune system. You just take a meal and drop off. But if you're an ectoparasite, you're exposed, and the problem is the host can pull you off or bite you or scrape you off or whatever. Another category is parasitoids. Parasitoids are kind of like a predator parasite hybrid. So in a predator, you eat and consume and kill your prey. If you're a parasite, you don't eat your prey, you just steal resources from them. A parasitoid does both. So a parasitoid, as an example, there are parasitoid wasps that lay eggs on caterpillars. So here's the caterpillar, the green guy, and here's the parasitoid eggs. So this wasp laid all these eggs on the outside. The larvae, the wasp larvae, hatch out of the eggs and crawl into the caterpillar and eat it. So they're acting like a parasite in that they're stealing resources from the caterpillar. They're also acting like a predator because the parasitoid larvae will kill the caterpillar, so it ends up dying. So parasitoids are kind of like, they have one foot in both circles. They kind of act like a predator because they kill their host, they consume it, but they also act like a parasite because they kill it by consuming resources. They don't eat. Like one parasitoid doesn't eat an entire caterpillar. It takes a bunch of them to do that. All right, that wraps up part one. Part two coming up.